McDermott, and in this video we're going to take a look at the two campaigns that the American Army conducted in northern Mexico. Once General Taylor had crossed the Rio Grande River, he held up for a period of time to get his army organized and to wait for reinforcement supplies and transportation, which he was woefully short of. Once he received those reinforcements, he began to move on the city of Monterey, which at that time and today is the second largest city in Mexico and the capital of the state of Nuevo León. He began that march on the 6th of July, 1846. His army, numbering 6,640 soldiers, arrived on the plain north of that city the morning of 19 September and was immediately fired on by cannon located in the city's citadel. The city of Monterey was well fortified, but its main link to the south, a road through Saltillo and on to Mexico City, was not defended, and General Taylor sent troops to cut that road and prepare to attack Monterey from the west. Those troops also seized the fortified summits of three hills adjacent to the road. With Monterey isolated, General Taylor planned a double envelopment, which soon became a battle that was hard to control and virtually impossible to coordinate. Following a cold night, units were ordered to attack the city from both the north and the east, and troops attacking into the city soon encountered intense cannon fire. But they managed to fight their way into neighborhoods where they found the flat roofs of houses occupied by Mexican infantry, who refused to give way. Many of the streets were also barricaded and provided deadly fields of fire for the 7,300 Mexican soldiers defending the city. Once into Monterey, the Americans lost their cohesion in the confusion of streets, and even after the arrival of Captain Braxton Bragg's artillery, were unable to advance and were eventually withdrawn from the town. 3 rifle companies moving in to reinforce and cover the withdrawal also came under such murderous fire that a third of their officers and men were either killed or wounded before they could pull back. And by dark, the Americans had made very little headway, while suffering 394 men killed or wounded. The night was cold with a violent rain, which did not stop the Americans from attacking and seizing high ground on the western flank of the city. Limited Mexican counterattacks were stopped, and additional positions were captured in a series of hand-to-hand fights. Those developments caused the Mexican commander to abandon all of his outer defenses and concentrate his forces in the center of the town, primarily around the Plaza Mayor. When the Americans discovered their enemies withdrawn into the town, they moved forward cautiously. As resistance stiffened, the American troops, rather than advancing down the streets, began a house-to-house drive by breaking through adjoining adobe walls. At 3 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of September, General Taylor received a message stating that the Mexicans would surrender the city provided they could withdraw unhindered. And of course, General Taylor was not about to agree to that. After much discussion, a final armistice agreement was signed, allowing the Mexicans to keep their firearms and an artillery battery of 6 guns. The Mexican army was to evacuate the city within a week, and they accomplished that. The agreement drew widespread condemnation in Washington, where President Polk insisted that no army officer had the authority to conduct or to negotiate a truce with the enemy. However, General Taylor felt his actions were justified by the administration's repeated demands that he win a peace on the battlefield, and he felt that he had done that. And in fact, he wrote, "These terms are liberal, but not considered too much so by all reflecting men. Considering our situation, besides, it was thought it would be judicious to act with magnanimity toward a prostrate foe, as theirs was a general wish for peace on the part of the Mexican nation. So felt General Taylor. Although the Mexicans had surrendered, they were certainly capable of continuing the battle until that armistice had been signed. Renewed fighting would have resulted in additional American losses if General Taylor had refused to sign, and the size of his army, already much smaller than what he believed necessary, would have been diminished with additional casualties. The Americans were also low on ammunition, and they had no system for resupplying or restocking until the armistice provided time for supplies to arrive from the United States. American casualties were 120 men killed, 368 wounded, and 43 missing, while the Mexicans suffered a total of 367 soldiers killed and wounded. General Taylor's problem with undisciplined volunteers was ever present and soon grew as the occupation of Monterey began. On 4 January 1847, Texas volunteers blamed locals for the deaths of several of their men and began shooting all the Mexican adults that they could round up. More than 50 civilians were reported killed in that particular event, and a series of other murders and assaults poisoned the atmosphere in the city. Texans were blamed for the majority of the incidents, allegedly in revenge for Mexican attacks on Texans during the previous years. Problems with uncontrollable troops declined when 2 regiments of the Texas Mounted Volunteers departed for home. Many of those men were members of the Texas Rangers. And once back in Texas, they went back to work combating Indians and rustlers on Texas frontiers. General Taylor wrote, however, that with their departure, we may look forward to a restoration of quiet and good order in Monterey. The manpower problems that General Taylor suffered only became worse when he was ordered to transfer all but 5,000 of his soldiers to General Scott for his upcoming advance from Veracruz to Mexico City. The Mexicans intercepted a message disclosing the weakness of the American army at Monterey, and Mexican General Santa Anna began moving a much larger force north from Mexico City to confront General Taylor and his army at the upcoming Battle of Buena Vista. Captain Napoleon Donna described some of the actions during the battle for Monterey to his wife, and it seems that after capturing a key hilltop position on the west side of Monterey, the Americans were unable to seize their next objective, the heavily defended Bishop's Palace in the outskirts of the town. Tempting the enemy to recapture the high ground that the Americans had seized, a thin line of skirmishers advanced down the hill while 3 regiments of American infantry lay just out of sight beyond the crest. The American skirmishers ran for cover, and halfway up the hill, the Lancers were stunned when 1,200 American infantry rose up, gave them a volley, and charged with the bayonet. In Captain Donna's letter, he wrote, "You never saw such a surprised set of fellows in this world as were those Lancers. They turned their horses and struck off down the hill and into the city, leaving some 20 or 30 of their fellows on the ground." The American troops continued running down the hill so hotly that they entered the Bishop's Palace pell-mell with the enemy before those doors could be slammed and barricaded. And so ended the battle for Monterey. And next, we'll take a look at the advance south from Monterey that General Taylor conducted in his efforts to meet and defeat the much larger force commanded by General Santa Anna. Early in 1847, General Taylor began moving a force of 4,600 men south to the city of Saltillo to secure the major approach to Monterey. Remember, he had been required to move all but 5,000 men, which meant that he left a 400-man garrison to hold Monterey. The Americans established a strong defense on the main road 7 miles south of Saltillo near the hacienda of San Juan de la Buena Vista, and the troops went into positions where the road passed through a narrow valley which was crossed at right angles by several dry creek beds. On 22 February 1847, General Santa Anna demanded the Americans surrender and received the following reply, which was delivered by General Taylor's aide, Major William Bliss. "I beg leave to say that I decline acceding to your request for surrender," wrote Old Rough and Ready. The Mexican army attacked by initially sending skirmishers against the Americans' right flank and then pushing the left flank back with their main attack while attempting to cut the road behind the American lines with cavalry. Follow-on assaults were met by a stout infantry and artillery defense, which succeeded in holding the American positions. The battle evolved into a series of hotly contested actions that saw General Taylor moving troops to counter Mexican attacks, content to hold his defensive positions until dark ended the first day's action. Considering the majority of his army was composed of volunteers with little training and very little combat experience, going into a defense was certainly a sensible tactic. Early the next morning, the Mexicans demonstrated against the right flank again and conducted their main attack on the left with about 7,000 infantry supported by artillery. While some of the American defenders broke and ran, others conducted a disciplined withdrawal toward the hacienda, where the Mississippi Rifles, commanded by Colonel Jefferson Davis, who was wounded in the fight, played a key role in shoring up the American defense. American cavalry assisted in containing the Mexican assault, and other reinforcements arrived to include an artillery battery commanded by Captain Braxton Bragg. Ordered to hold his position at all costs, Captain Bragg was firing canister when General Taylor galloped up to tell him, "Double shot your guns and give 'em hell, Bragg." Later the order would become, quote, "Give them a little more grape, Captain Bragg." And subsequently, that approved quotation became the campaign slogan that helped carry General Taylor into the White House 3 years later. The action was at close quarters, and it was a no-holds-barred fight until it finally ended in the midst of a major thunderstorm. Early on 25 February, the Mexicans began withdrawing to the south, and the Americans did not pursue. So the upshot of the fight at Buena Vista was that the American move to the south was stopped, and General Santa Anna's efforts to move north and recapture Monterey was frustrated. Casualties included Colonel Archibald Yell, a former congressman and governor of Arkansas, and Colonel John Hardin, another congressman commanding regiments from Illinois and Kentucky. Also killed was Henry Clay Jr., the second son of Senator Henry Clay, who was an outspoken opponent of the war. General Taylor reported 267 men killed and an additional 456 wounded or missing. Mexican losses were totaled at an extraordinary 3,533 soldiers killed or wounded. Following the Battle of Buena Vista, American troops returned to Monterey, and in November, General Taylor sailed for the United States. His military career was effectively over, and without any prior political experience, he was elected to the presidency in 1848. General Taylor's reputation was polished by descriptions such as this account of his bravery on the battlefield written by a veteran of the fight, a man named Samuel McNeill. McNeill wrote, "I must mention one circumstance that happened there which shows the extraordinary coolness of General Taylor in battle. He saw a small cannonball coming directly toward his person, and rather than spurring old Whitey, his horse, out of the way, he coolly rose up in his very short stirrups and permitted that cannonball to pass between his person and the saddle." Well, whether that anecdote is true or not, McNeill paints a picture guaranteed to make any man consider the possible seriousness of the consequences of such a reckless act. Well, under any circumstance, at this point the war shifted from northern Mexico to the port city of Veracruz, where General Winfield Scott was preparing to conduct the American Army's first amphibious assault across an enemy-held beach. And we will look at that campaign in the next video. Until then, I would appreciate any comments you might have. We can open a conversation, and God bless each and every one of us.